Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host TJ Mabardi. Today is Wednesday, June 26th, and we got some breaking news last night that the New York Knicks are trading for Brooklyn Nets forward Mikal Bridges in a deal that sends 5 first-round picks to Brooklyn to help them jumpstart their rebuild. They move on from Bridges, who has been one of the more sought-after players in the NBA these past few years, and the Knicks land him. So we're going to be diving into the trade breakdown from both the perspective of the Knicks, where it puts them amongst other Eastern Conference contenders, and the Brooklyn Nets as well. Additionally, we got a little bit of a nugget added on to this trade where Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN reported that the Houston Rockets and Brooklyn Nets agreed to a trade that just exchanged some draft picks, but it included a move that sent a first-round pick from the Phoenix Suns back to Houston, and they are potentially trying to load up to trade for Kevin Durant. So we're going to be talking about just the general possibilities of Durant being traded this summer, and additionally, if the Rockets are at a point where last season was pretty successful and wondering whether or not it is time for them to sort of push their chips in. And then finally, we're going to be finishing off the show by diving into some NBA draft topics of both the biggest questions for tonight and as additionally the top prospects that can play immediately impactful basketball for potential contenders. But before we dive into all of that, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To any of our viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us all of your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports. And if you would like to become a bigger part of the show, you can leave a comment with a tip or donation at the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker, gsmcpodcast.net. Your comment will pop up on screen for everyone to see. Anything would be greatly appreciated there. Definitely was not the headline that we were expecting to get late on a Tuesday night, but the two New York teams in the Knicks and the Nets making this type of a deal, and both teams sort of flying in different directions. So just for the trade details, the Knicks traded 4 unprotected first-round picks of their own, a 2025 first-round pick from the Milwaukee Bucks, a first-round pick swap in 2028, a 2025 second-round pick, and forward Bojan Bogdanovic, who the Knicks traded for at the deadline, and he ended up missing the playoffs. So Bogdanovic, actually going back to Brooklyn, spent some time there a couple years ago, and exchange the Nets give up Mikal Bridges and 2026 second round pick, I believe it is. So the Nets go on to sort of finally press that rebuild button. There were a lot of rumors surrounding whether or not they were going to move around Mikal Bridges. They put out, maybe it was a little bit of a front to drive up the price on him, that they were fully comfortable in rebuilding around him. Now, Bridges is an excellent player, but at 27 years old, that never really made sense to me. But ultimately, look where it got them, where they get this haul of assets, including some picks along the way that belong to themselves, because they ended up making a second deal as well with the Houston Rockets, where they exchanged some picks there. Rights to pretty much first round picks in 2025 and 29, and the Phoenix pick, and the Nets were able to get their own pick back. So obviously a lot of draft capital flying back and forth there. I know it can be a lot to keep up with, but essentially this sets the Nets up in this area where they can rebuild heading into next season. They're supposedly not done moving assets. They do have that big Ben Simmons contract. Not sure if they were maybe going to try to go after a young star. They could potentially try and use that along with these draft picks. but I think that they are just fully hitting the reset button and seeing where it takes them. But for the Knicks, this is a situation where they had a very successful season this past year, and if it weren't for injuries, they could have potentially had a chance to take down the Boston Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, I never thought that the Knicks were going to be able to knock out the Celtics as they were currently constructed, and this is definitely a step in the right direction in terms of their immediate level of competitiveness. But there is something to be said for the fact that this was a massive haul of draft picks that they gave up, and it does sort of go from being this fun, feisty Knicks team that has been in the playoffs the past few years to, well, they are committed to winning a championship right now, and expectations are coming. And the Knicks understand that as well. That's why they make this kind of a deal. But it is interesting that they have sort of, out of nowhere almost, it seemed like when they signed Jalen Brunson just a few off seasons ago, they were this team struggling to find their identity, and now just like that, they find themselves in the heart of the NBA Finals contention. So you have to give the front office a ton of credit for where they have gotten up to this point. But things become a lot trickier for the Knicks this offseason, considering the fact that they still have a lot of unknowns with some key players that they need to bring back. OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein are the two guys that it feels like are massively impactful to the identity that the Knicks have of being this hard-nosed team, getting it done on the defensive side of the ball, and being smart offensively, having passing ability 1 through 5, and can provide ball movement. I know that it was a lot of Jalen Brunson in the postseason this past year, but that's also because of the fact that there were so many injuries for the Knicks coming into this whole thing. So I think that things currently stand today, I would not pick them to be better than the Celtics next year. They have to figure out what they are going to do. Now, it sounds like they are still fully committed to trying to get OG Anunoby under contract. And with all of these contracts, it's important to consider that under this new CBA, they do have the possibility of bringing everybody back. They are going to fall deeper into the luxury tax, but they can still do so. It just restricts everything else outside of that. So the question is a little bit, are the Knicks a completed process here if they bring back OG Anunoby and Isaiah Hartenstein? I think they have the majority of what they are going to need. I still feel like spacing is probably one of the bigger things for them. And later in the show, we're going to be diving into prospects that can play potentially impactful basketball for contending teams immediately. The Knicks have a couple late first round picks. I believe specifically it is 24 and 25, something along those lines, and that's maybe an area where they can look to go after a couple different guys. I guess maybe a little sneak peek into that. There are some three-point shooters. I think that if the Knicks were to go out and make a move for a Tristan Da Silva, maybe a Baylor Shireman, these are a couple guys that, again, we're going to dive into a little bit deeper in the show later, but I think just a little bit of spacing with size as well. Now, obviously, we know Tom Thibodeau. He's all about his defense as well, so I don't know if necessarily Tristan Da Silva has showed the overall background in terms of defense that he might not be the number one option there. But, regardless with this Knicks situation, I do think that they have checked a number of boxes in terms of being a legitimate contender. And it is interesting sort of having this conversation in relation to everything that was just sort of brought up about the Boston Celtics for a number of these years, where the Celtics, from the perspective of most people, don't have a top 5 player in the NBA, and typically in this league we see that as something that is necessary to win a championship. But the fact that the Celtics were able to get it done this year without maybe having that traditional superstar performance dragging their team through the playoffs, the Knicks can look around at the roster that they assembled, and there is a ton of well-rounded talent there. Again, especially if they bring back OG Anunoby Anunoby. There is so much switchability on defense. That was another massive part of the Celtics' makeup this past season. Spacing is going to be a thing for them, and that would be my number one concern. And sort of very briefly on that note as well, when you talk about the pursuit of Anunoby and Hartenstein and the fact that you're lining it up with this massive contract coming in from Mikal Bridges, you already paid Jalen Brunson, of course, and all of these different factors, it does make me question what the future of Julius Randle in New York is going to be. Randle is an interesting player. I think that the majority of NBA fans, I don't know how many you are going to find that Julius Randle is their favorite player, but at the same time, I do think that he provides something. The Knicks, unquestionably, in my eyes, were worse off not having him this year during the playoffs because he was injured. Now, if they can turn that into another asset that's possibly more malleable with what the Knicks are currently trying to run with, because I do have questions with Randle, the fact that in my eyes, he plays a lot of isolation basketball. He's shown flashes of development over the past couple of years in terms of passing. And I think coming off of this year as well, maybe there is something within him that understands that this is very clearly Jalen Brunson's team now. And if he's more receptive to playing a little bit more of a number 2 role, that could be massively impactful for them, because he plays defense when he wants to is a little bit of the issue for me with him. But he can play defense and he can rebound, both of which are, again, when you talk about the Knicks being this hustle team, I feel like that's a very big part of their identity. And I'm just curious how they're going to go about this in terms of Julius Randle and what his future looks like. Now, I'm not sure necessarily what the options are out there in terms of, are you going to be able to get a lot of value out of Julius Randle, who it's not like his stock is exactly sky high right now. But I don't know that the Knicks are going to need to either. Again, my one glaring thing for them would be 3-point shooting. I don't know necessarily how great you can feel about that. Now, Dante DiVincenzo had an incredible second half of the season. We saw Josh Hart knock down some big threes in the postseason, so who knows, maybe if that can come into a regularity for him, that would be, I think that this Knicks organization, especially now that you talk about, I can't believe I've gone 10 minutes here without mentioning the Villanova Knicks here. You have 5 Wildcats from that championship team in the late 2010s, and I think that all of these guys are going to have a chemistry that is unlike any sort of dynamic we have seen in recent NBA history, considering you have 5 players from college together who are all very publicly still close and are all winning basketball players. So I'm super intrigued by that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, but definitely for the Knicks, this comes into a perspective where, yes, it's absolutely fun, and I think no matter what, you're probably looking at the fact, Knicks fans are just going to be so grateful for what they have right now. I really, at least the Knicks fans in my life, I think are just, smiling through this whole process after a number of years of stagnancy from the franchise, that at least it seems like they are making moves in the right direction. Now, this Mikal Bridges deal does come with risk, undoubtedly, and as fun as everything is right now, there's going to be a buildup of pressure over the next couple years. But at the same time, I think that we have seen in the NBA year in, year out, especially as of late, that if you want to contend, you kind of just have to hang in the conversation long enough until your window opens. To some degree, that's what happened with the Boston Celtics this past year. You go back in every year in the playoffs lately, there is some sort of injury that does seem to sway the results of the playoffs. So for the Knicks, I think that they are in a great spot right now. Again, maybe some issues down the road, but right now it is all celebration right now for the Knicks, and I think that they are going to be so much fun to watch, so I'm excited for that. But there are a bunch of other sort of underlying things that came with this trade. Woj shortly after reported that there was some idea that the Houston Rockets think that they can trade for Kevin Durant. So we're going to dive into that whole idea of, from the Suns' perspective, whether or not they should look to move Kevin Durant this summer. And additionally, are the Rockets in a position where all of a sudden they think they can be pushing their chips in to try and go out and win a title? So we're going to be diving into all of that. But first, we have to take a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. So continuing on the conversations of the fallout of this Mikal Bridges trade, that goes through late last night and obviously sets the internet on fire. And then very shortly after, Adrian Wojnarowski adds an additional news bomb that he reports that the Brooklyn Nets and Houston Rockets have agreed to a trade that solely includes draft capital, but does so pretty significantly. The Nets end up getting their own 2025 first-round pick back that they had previously traded in the James Harden deal with the Rockets. They get a 2026 first-round pick from the Rockets, and then rights to the least favorable of a first-round pick in 2029, so essentially a swap. On the Rockets' end of this, they have the more favorable of that pick swap. They get a 2025 pick swap as well, and in 2027, they get a first-round pick from the Phoenix Suns that was initially traded to the Nets for Kevin Durant, which Woj then reported on that the Rockets are hoping that they can acquire some of Phoenix's draft capital to then send back to the Suns in exchange for Kevin Durant. And immediately, that was just sort of this other ripple effect of, we see this first trade go down, and then all of a sudden, there is a, bigger fish out there potentially on the move this offseason. And it is a very interesting conversation. The Suns coming off of a disappointing season. Ultimately, I still don't hold the regular season against them all too much, considering some of the time that was missed from Devin Booker and Brad Beal, and the fact that the big three that they had never really got all that much runtime together during the regular season, that it was fine for them to end up as a 49-win team, and they avoided the play-in tournament as well. So I wouldn't say that last year was a disaster, but then when you lose, not just lose, but you get swept by a young Minnesota Timberwolves team that is, you would think, only going to continue to get better, that it's not a very good sign for the Suns moving forward in terms of whether or not this super team that they have put together and putting all their eggs in the basket of Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Brad Beal, that might not be the way to go in this current NBA landscape. So it becomes very interesting. Does it make sense for the Suns to trade him? I think absolutely. And there's a very good chance we heard all of the quotes that came out of the Suns front office group during their exit interviews after that first round, where they believe that they still have the infrastructure that is necessary to win a championship, and they are still bought in, at least publicly, on what they currently have. But it is also interesting just looking at the fact that, again, the Timberwolves just sort of lapped them almost in the first round of the playoffs this past year, and there are a number of other up-and-coming young teams. The Thunder, who just got the 1 seed. I don't believe that the Denver Nuggets are going anywhere. The Mavericks, who just made the finals. And it just gets to be a very crowded Western Conference, and for the Suns, who have just been so all in on this current window, I don't know if this core has it for even another 2 seasons. That right now, the way that things currently stand, they will be able to get a number of assets for either Kevin Durant or Devin Booker. You can kind of put in that conversation as well. It's been floated out that he could potentially want out, but I'm not sure how much is actually there necessarily. But Durant is an interesting conversation because he obviously has been jumping, you could say, from team to team for the past number of years, and he ends up in Phoenix, where it does feel like this is a little bit of a legacy defining, and I hate that term, so excuse me, but to some degree, there are going to be people who won't forgive him for leaving another destination that didn't work out after of course, he chose to leave the Warriors, and then he goes to Brooklyn to team up with Kyrie, and that was a disaster. And Kevin Durant, the general manager, has not been doing a very good job of putting himself in the best possible situation. And it becomes really interesting where if this thing is already falling by the wayside, I feel like for the Suns, trying to regain any sort of assets that you can could be the way to go here. We just saw Mikal Bridges get traded for 5 first-round picks, and that was the main piece of the deal that got him from Brooklyn to Phoenix. So I think that, from the Suns front office perspective, you can run somebody dry of assets, and especially if the Rockets are trying to find a way to in turn get you your own draft capital, I think it's hard to sort of turn down an opportunity like that. But ultimately, I think the Suns are going to stay put at least for this season. They just brought in Mike Budenholzer. I am assuming that they are going to try and run into this year and see if Budenholzer can make the most of the current situation, but I'm very skeptical of it. We have Kelsey in the comments section asking about Durant to the Lakers. The reality is, I think there is pretty much no way that the Suns would make a deal with the Lakers in the first place. And then also with the fact that when you look at what the Nets just got for Mikal Bridges, I don't think that the Lakers have any sort of that type of assets to make a deal like that. So definitely skeptical on that one. But, I think that all in all, it's just very interesting to see how this is going to play out for the Suns, where if it's on the table a little bit, yet again, we're talking about Kevin Durant. He is going to be drawing all types of suitors. Are the Suns going to sort of take a step back and look at their overall situation here and do any sort of reflection that leads them to the idea that at least I personally have, and I think a lot of people share, that in this Western Conference, you're asking far too much of 3 players that aren't even necessarily fully compatible with one another to just sort of one-on-one will their way into contention. I don't know if I see it, but let me know in the comments section whether or not you believe in this Suns, current infrastructure, and if they can make moves sort of along the edges. It is sort of gone, and I understand that it's not the flashiest name ever, but Grayson Allen was hurt for a good part of that series. I think he got hurt in game 2 possibly. and didn't return. Once that was the case, they're already so top heavy. I mean, that was a brutal loss for them. So I don't know. I'm not an optimist for sure with the Suns right now. If they decided to run it back one more time here with a coach that just won a championship a few years ago, I can't say they would definitively be wrong, but you know, while the iron's hot here and you see the precedent has already been established for how much, it's almost like the Rudy Gobert trade a number of years ago, where when Gobert was traded for 5 or so first round picks, everybody else was sort of worried to top that. For the Suns and Durant, they can be the ones that go out and establish the market right now and use this Bridges deal as some leverage to do so. But again, let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Kelsey, I did not go to see Lana Del Rey. She was at Fenway last week. I am in the Boston area. But I saw a number of different people that I know go to the concert and said she was amazing. So, for whatever that's worth. But we're going to be heading into our next break here. And when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about the Houston Rockets, because all of a sudden they seem to view themselves as a team that would be, in the position to go out and get a Kevin Durant, which is a little bit of a 180 from where our expectations of the Rockets these past couple years have been. So we're going to be diving into all of that. Stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
So with the Mikal Bridges trade going down to New York, a subplot that stuck out of this whole thing was the fact that the Houston Rockets are supposedly targeting Kevin Durant as a trade piece. That is why they made the move with the Brooklyn Nets to give up what is very likely going to be a valuable first round pick in 2025, especially with the Nets moving on from Bridges. That could be one of the top picks in the draft. Cooper Flagg is one of the most highly touted prospects in recent years, and the Rockets are passing up on that, of course, for some other picks involved in the deal whatsoever. As much as I mentioned that, the Suns pick in 2027 could end up being pretty valuable itself as well, but this is an interesting move from the Rockets, where it was reported that their intentions were to make this second move. And I think it becomes a really interesting conversation with the Rockets, considering the fact that, they have been at the top of the lottery for the past number of years. And while they are also at the top of the lottery this year in terms of the fact that they have the 3rd overall pick, they did have they got that from Brooklyn in that James Harden trade. So this is a situation where they believe that they can really continue to build on what was a successful season last year in Ime Udoka's first year with the Rockets, where they went 41-41 down the stretch of the year. It seemed like they were going to rival the Warriors for that last play-in tournament spot. They ultimately come short there, but there was a lot of positives to build on last year, and clearly the front office group is really getting excited with what we have potentially seen. Now, I don't know if I'm necessarily in on it. I think that Ime Udoka is an incredible coach, and obviously whatever went down behind the scenes at the end of Boston does sort of rupture his reputation a little bit. I mean, he has got to be kicking himself a little bit considering the fact that they just went on to win without him. And again, for whatever went on behind the scenes, that very easily could have been him lifting that Larry O'Brien already in what would have been just his third year as a head coach in the NBA. But I still believe in him as a coach, and they have a lot of talented young pieces. Now, just yesterday, I did touch on the fact that both Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün are going to be eligible for max rookie extensions this upcoming offseason. And so that does probably play into this conversation about making a blockbuster trade anyways, because I think for the Rockets, it is going to be a very hard decision, especially just after last offseason where they decided to go the route of overpaying a little bit to both Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks in order to just get some solid role players in the building, some players with experience. It is a very young Houston core, and they just wanted to start a winning culture, and that has been something that ever since James Harden essentially went on strike in the middle of the season, at the beginning of the year while playing in whatever it was, 2021, I think, 2022, whichever year that was. But I think, Houston understood the situation that they are currently in, and they needed to sort of jumpstart almost the organization into the right direction. And they definitely did so last year. But now they are in a place where they have these big contracts on the books already in Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks for the next number of years, and they're going to have to start paying all of these lottery picks that they've been taking over the past couple years. Jalen Green, obviously number 2 overall, but Alperen Şengün just outside the lottery in that same draft class. You have Jabari Smith Jr., who I think it would be really interesting to see him play alongside Kevin Durant for whatever it's worth as well. Maybe he would be a part of a deal, but kind of has a similar frame and at least the idea of what his ceiling could be. Definitely not saying he's going to ever be Kevin Durant, but the thought process is that he plays sort of that similar way if he could get the scoring consistency up. But I really like Jabari Smith Jr., and then they also just took Amen Thompson as well in this past draft with the 4th overall pick. So or unless it was 4th or 5th. But regardless, they have all of these guys. Not to mention, there are other guys as well that I really like. Tari Eason was a late first-round pick a couple years ago, and he spent last year injured for the most part, but he's another talented player. And, all of this just bakes into the conversation about the Rockets of they are going to have to start dishing out money to their current players soon anyways. And if you want to sort of make the most of that by going out and making a trade like this, I don't think that idea is totally crazy, but at the same time, for Kevin Durant at this point in his career, you are probably only getting another, I would say, 2-3 years of elite play from Kevin Durant. We have seen the fall off is maybe a little bit dramatic, but we have seen the decline in his play over the past couple years, and I just don't know if I'd be willing to give up all of those assets. Now, again, for the Rockets, they would probably go about this trying to give up maybe a little bit more of a player-based package than topping, if Mikal Bridges is going to get 5, does that mean Kevin Durant gets 7 first-round picks in exchange? Something along those lines. Feels like it should be more, but again, the Rockets have these other players that they can at least sort of work around that idea, but I'm not sure where I'm at with the Rockets, because I'm definitely a big fan of them. I'm going to, be rooting for them, but pushing all the chips in right now feels very aggressive to me. And I wouldn't look to rush it. We've seen a number of teams in recent years, have, more successful than just being 500 and almost making a play-in tournament. But, you look at a number of teams the past couple of years, the Hawks definitely stand out, the Cavaliers, who both went in on heavy deals to go out and get some all-star caliber players to help elevate their rosters. That hasn't necessarily worked out yet. We're seeing the Knicks now do it. We'll see what that pans out into. But I just don't know if that's the right way to go about it. Now, at some point, you do have to take the step forward, and I do believe that the supporting cast in Houston is better than people give them credit for. But ultimately, again, going all in on a deal like this is probably too much. As Kelsey says, Rockets lose, Lakers win banner 18. I wouldn't count on the Lakers winning banner 18 just yet necessarily. I think that they are probably ways away from it. Obviously, when you have LeBron, you're never fully out of it. But outside of him and Anthony Davis, I'm not sure. And yeah, I'm just going to leave it at that. We've been doing a lot of Lakers content lately. But, ultimately here, I guess final thoughts for the Rockets is the fact that they have a very bright future. And I sort of equate them to, they could be a little bit of a similar trajectory as the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now, I don't expect them to go out and win 57 games next year. But the Thunder were hovering around that 500, maybe a little bit better for a season before and the 2022-23 season, and then ultimately took that leap. Now, I don't think that the Rockets are going to have any sort of an individual player explosion to the level of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to be able to rattle off 2 first-team All-NBA appearances, but there's still a lot of talent, and they are definitely going to have a decision to make in terms of who do they really want to build around. We saw Şengün. We've seen Şengün for the first part of last year. He was able to play a little bit more of the Jokic-Sabonis role, where more of it was running through him, and he was sort of making the right plays. He had a very nice season for himself, but when the Rockets also started to rattle off wins, it was when Jalen Green was going crazy, and non-coincidentally, I think, started to happen once Şengün went out. So, a lot of questions there. I don't know. Honestly, I would probably rather build around Jalen Green than Şengün. I think that's probably an unpopular opinion, but I have been a believer in Jalen Green through this whole process up to this point, and for him as well, he played in the G League Ignite, which we've seen was a little bit of a failed experiment for the NBA. I think once he learns that he can't necessarily be, play the hero ball every single possession, again, that's why the Rockets needed to establish this winning culture, and we'll see how much Jalen Green has bought into it, or whether or not it was just that he was getting a free-for-all with shots down the stretch of the year, and we know that he has the talent, but can he play into the team system? All of those questions are going to be still there for the Rockets next season, but let me know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But the NBA draft officially tips off tonight, so we are going to be answering some of the biggest questions surrounding the draft, so be sure to stick with us through the break. Definitely, any of our live viewers, if you have questions you want us to get to, ask away, because that is what we're going to be doing after this quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We do very briefly here have some breaking news as the Miami Heat have just agreed to a max contract extension with Bam Adebayo. It sounds like this was reported on by Shams Charania. Don't have all the details in front of me right now, but it looks like it is a 3-year deal worth $166 million, which would equate to about $55 million per year, which is kind of crazy for somebody who isn't a traditional creator necessarily, not somebody that you are running your offense through, but I still do love Bam Adebayo as a building block. I think every single team could benefit from having them on the roster, and it's going to be curious to see what the future looks like in Miami, considering the fact that we do have some Jimmy Butler rumors that have floated around. They definitely have some moves that they need to make next season before, I would say, fully reestablishing themselves as championship contenders. And yet you see Butler, you see Spoelstra, you see that Heat logo. You can't, at least me personally, I never fully count them out, but I do think they have some work ahead of them as to whether or not they need to make some complementary moves. But we'll probably touch more on that tomorrow when we get all of the details. But for now, want to talk about the biggest questions ahead in the 2024 NBA draft. The draft obviously hasn't had necessarily all too much excitement around, any one individual prospect, which to some people seems underwhelming. Maybe they can't get a grasp of it the same way. There is a lot of international prospects and G League Ignite prospects that people aren't already familiar with, which kind of plays into that as well. But it's also a lot of unknown in this draft, and I think that is pretty exciting. So we're going to be touching on a number of the big questions surrounding this, starting with the number 1 overall pick and the Atlanta Hawks in terms of what are they going to do, because they are in this weird middle ground where last year they actually finished a little bit sub 500, 36-46, actually worse than I thought off the top of my head. But, a 36 win team that had a chance to go on to make the postseason and fell short, which really wasn't all too much of a surprise necessarily. The Hawks were somewhat of a mess this year, and I think at that point it was Trae Young coming back from his dislocated thumb or something along those lines, fractured thumb at the end of the year, that he wasn't necessarily, in his groove down the stretch of the season, and they were never a real threat to even, I think, make the playoffs, even with the play-in tournament. They were definitively the worst out of the 4 teams there, but now they're in this situation with the first overall pick, lucked into it a little bit. Obviously not quite these, superstar sweepstakes that is what we've seen the past number of years, but it is still a very interesting position to be in. I'm not sure if it is their best path here to use the number 1 overall pick. Now, it's a very strange situation, again, understanding that there isn't necessarily a superstar player available. Now, there are some guys out there that could help contribute. I think that specifically if you look at Donovan Clingan, could be a pretty good fit there in Atlanta, but you're drafting somebody who has pretty limited offensive upside, I would say, with the first overall pick. That doesn't necessarily sound like a great bargain. Now, obviously, as much as they currently play through Trae Young, it is very individual based and ISO heavy, that maybe Clingan would be the perfect fit because of that. They don't need another superstar guard to throw out there alongside Trae. It would be leaning into the idea of just building around him instead, and that's something that we saw a little bit with the Mavericks. Now, obviously, they went out to get Kyrie Irving, but the other guys of Derek Lively and PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford, these are all players that sort of play well into the system that is Luka Doncic. So maybe the Hawks try and lean into that. I think that they have a ton of questions ahead of them in the offseason, and I think it starts with the draft in terms of how they are going to choose to play this whole thing. But the number one pick is very much, a question as to who is going to be available, and that's in large part because of the fact that the player who is number one on most franchises boards, Alex Sarr, chose to not work out for the Hawks and would prefer to be drafted by the Wizards at number 2. So my next question here is, who does the fact that Alex Sarr doesn't want to be drafted by the Hawks number 1, who does that say more about? Between Sarr or the Hawks? Now, I think it's really interesting because when you take it from the perspective of Sarr, you're going to use a top 3 pick on somebody who doesn't even necessarily, if you want to frame it in terms of he doesn't want to, doesn't feel like he can be the number 1 overall pick, I think it's more that he is just looking at these situations and sort of understanding that in the modern NBA, you're going to make your money regardless of if you're number 1 or number 2. But it is an interesting concept that a player would pass up on, a couple $1 million and the pride of being the number 1 overall pick, even if he went at it from the perspective of, I'd like to go number 1, but I don't want to end up with the Hawks. And he hasn't outright said that he doesn't want to go to the Hawks, just that it sounds like he would prefer the Wizards. He'll play in Atlanta if that's where he ends up, but at this point for the Hawks, it's a pretty big risk for them of taking an international prospect that they haven't even been able to actually get in the building yet. So I don't think he's going to go number 1, and I think that ultimately it kind of says more about him than it does the Hawks. Now, the Hawks situation is a little bit dicey, I would say, in terms of being stuck in mediocrity some, not knowing what the future of the organization is going to look like, whether Trae Young and or DeJounte Murray is going to be there. I have a hard time imagining that they're going to run it back with both of those players on the team next season, but it's very much in play. I think it would be a mistake, but, at the same time, I can understand Sarr wanting to have more opportunities in Washington and wanting to continue to grow, but it does make you think a little bit in terms of the mental makeup of Sarr, who has already jumped around a number of different times, going from France to overtime elite, and then instead of sticking it out with overtime elite, or going to, a pro league in Europe or even the G League, he ends up in Australia with worse competition. So that is something at least to keep in the back of your mind in terms of, again, the mental makeup a little bit of Sarr. And from the interviews that I've seen, I don't question his character by any means, but it is an interesting, something to point out there. But next question here is, what is the Spurs' plan to rebuild around Victor Wembanyama? They currently have picks number 4 and 8 in this draft and seem like they would be in a golden position to potentially add some talent around Wemby if this were a normal draft. Now, obviously, reputation of it isn't that there is some sort of star forward or guard that is going to be, an answer, a true number 2 running mate to Wemby. And for me, I think that the most important thing is going out and getting a guard. And I'm curious to see whether or not they stick with the 4th and 8th overall picks, or if they end up trying to package those for something else. Would be interesting to see, but I would like to see them take a guard, preferably a Reed Shepherd or Rob Dillingham, to provide some level of just being able to throw an entry pass and to be able to space out the floor as well. Give Wembanyama some extra room to work with. I think that Stephon Castle would also be a little bit of an interesting pairing as well, throwing him into the mix with Wembanyama and Devin Vassell, but I don't know if Castle's going to be available for them at number 4. again, a situation where could they potentially try and move up in this draft to go get one solidified guy? We'll see. But they also have the number 35 overall pick, and if they're going to stick there, I think I would be very interested in watching them take Tyler Kolek, the point guard out of Marquette. He's a smaller player, so I think in terms of IQ-wise and just his ability as well, he has a pretty decent three-point shot that he could very much be able to sort of play in less competitive situations. I struggle to see him being able to get some real minutes in a playoff series because of his size and his defensive concerns, that he would just be able to be pushed around too much defensively. But if you're talking about just a developmental track for Victor Wembanyama, I see no reason why Tyler Kolek can't be a part of that plan at a low value second round pick, just for the sake of trying to add some extra guards into the mix so that you don't have to play Jeremy Sohan at the point guard anymore. But really interesting there. And then the last question here, just sort of a brief one. Can Houston use this number 3 pick to pull off a surprise blockbuster deal at the draft? My thought process is probably not, considering the fact that nobody does seem to love this draft. But it is interesting to me that the Rockets, this is a golden opportunity for them. They see themselves, at least, that they are not going to be at the top of the lottery for the next number of years. So could they potentially try and package this into something that will further make that a reality? We'll see there. My guess would be probably not, again, because of the strength of this draft, but we will have to see. But we are running low on time here. We're going to take one last final break, and for our last segment, I want to talk about the top NBA draft prospects that I believe could help contenders immediately next season. So stick with us, and we will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we are going to just be going through some names in the 2024 draft class that could end up playing for contenders this upcoming season and potentially carve out a role this season and next year. So starting off here, you have the two big men of Zach Edey and Donovan Clingan, last year's national championship matchup. I know that a lot of people are entirely out on Zach Edey. I'm definitely not in on him necessarily. He is probably one of the most polarizing prospects in this year's draft, and I'm not sure necessarily, I wouldn't guarantee that he is ever going to be a starting caliber center, but I do think that there are a number of teams that could absolutely benefit from having just an extra big option off of the bench to just kind of cause havoc for 10, 15 minutes a game. We saw last year how infuriated everybody in college basketball was when Edey would cause their favorite players to foul out just, minutes into the game. And obviously that's at a college level. Edey can't just rely on his size at the next level to necessarily be able to have that same type of an impact, but I do still think he's somebody that you can throw into this conversation as a player that can go out on the court, provide you a different look, and again, just sort of eat up some minutes. If you're a team in the East as well, or I would say probably the East when you want to look at a Joel Embiid, a Giannis, these players that obviously just use their brute force to get to the rim on a regular basis. And Edey, I don't think has the defensive discipline to lock down either one of them. I mean, nobody can in the first place, but I don't necessarily buy into Edey on that level, but I do think that he is just somebody, a body you can put in the paint to be a disruptor. And Klingon obviously has the, I would say, higher ceiling in terms of, I think his game translates better. The fact that he can actually play in the pick and roll, and who knows, maybe Edey will be able to. He was never really asked to do so all too much effectively at the college level, and that I think Klingon is just a little bit more athletic. The fact that he has, a little bit more lateral quickness and such. I expect Klingon to be a good player. I'm not fully there with Edey, but he is also somebody that, maybe late lottery, maybe, mid first round, you could end up getting and seeing him playing some real minutes next year. I did consider throwing Stephon Castle as one of these, lottery picks that could potentially do so as well. But I would prefer to see Castle actually on a younger team and see if there is anything to that. Can he be a more on-the-ball guy? Can he improve his shooting consistently? But if Castle were to be drafted by a competitive team, I mean, he's going to have the motor, the defensive capabilities to get minutes as well. I would just probably prefer to see him on a younger roster and sort of figure out more what his game is. But some late first round picks that I could see having a difference is Tristan Da Silva, a forward for Colorado this past year. And this is just a player who he played a little bit bigger at the college level, where he was kind of seen as more of a 4-5 type player that was able to stretch out the floor. Now, I don't know if he's going to be, a big man necessarily at the NBA level. I find that a little bit hard to believe, but at the same time, I do think that he can give you spacing from a little bit of a bigger player and could have a valuable impact on a team that just sort of throws him out in, I don't know, you can almost say a Maxi Kleba type role where, again, he's just going to space out the floor. He's going to have a little bit of versatility for you. And again, I think that he's just shooting always is going to translate in the NBA. So I definitely buy into Da Silva for those reasons, again, at least as a rotational player. But some other names out there as well. Baylor Shireman, he was a senior at Creighton this past year. Another player that is on the bigger side that just has a shot that you can trust. He's also been in college basketball for a number of years, so the experience is something. And, especially this past year where Creighton ends up making the run to the Sweet 16, I think that, he's seen some big moments. He's played a lot of big minutes in some of those games as well. So I think that he's somebody that could very easily find himself into the rotation of even, a Boston Celtics down the road here. But we will see on that. Ryan Dunn of Virginia is, in my opinion, the best defensive player in this draft class, and I could totally see him in like a New Orleans or something, just continuing to have all of these different wings that just fly out and put you in jail defensively. I totally see that from Dunn being able to translate to the next level. Now, offense is obviously the big concern with him, which is why he is maybe one of my most questionable players on this list. But I think that the framework is absolutely there for him. Again, you want to see a more developed offensive game, but I think that he is going to very easily be able to hold his own on the defensive end, and not just hold his own, but potentially be special. And they already have a number of guys that are sort of defensive specialists in New Orleans, so maybe they don't go that route, but you look at what they've done in the draft these past years with Dyson Daniels, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy III. You know, it is interesting to see whether or not Ryan Dunn. Also, Trey Murphy, former Virginia Cavalier, so I'll put that out there as well. But my last late first rounder here is Yves Missi. Now, he's also a little bit more raw that I'm not sure if we would see heavy minutes from necessarily, but I am just a believer in him that he can go out and be a high-intensity rim runner, almost a little bit of Robert Williams when he was at his peak in 2022, when he was fully healthy. I think there's a lot of elements to his game that still need to be developed, and I don't know if necessarily that is going to fully come into fruition if he does get thrown into a contending situation from day one, but I think that he has all of the physical tools to be able to carve out a role for himself in the NBA. The fact that he is such a high-energy player, I think he has that pop, the dynamicism, the explosion, all of, those types of things that can have him be a two-way beast that's, rim running on offense and is causing havoc in the paint defensively. So he intrigues me. Some second rounders I have here that I'll sort of quickly run through as well. Kyle Filipowski, the sophomore from Duke, 7-footer who is a very heads-up player, has a good post presence. Again, not necessarily somebody that I think you're ever going to run an offense through, but can hold somewhat of a similar role, probably at a lower level, but, along the same lines of Kling and Edey. I don't know if any of the three of those big men are ever going to have a three-point shot. Filipowski could possibly find it at some point. I know we've all seen the pre-draft process videos of, various guys extending their range a little bit. I don't know how much stock you can put into that at all, but Filipowski would be an interesting one to me. Harrison Ingram of UNC, the junior forward. He was their best offensive player this past year for UNC, at least in terms of players I would say that can translate scoring-wise to the NBA. Now, he didn't necessarily take over the expectations I was hoping for him, that he could be, a legitimate night-to-night number one option, but still someone I think he has all the size tools. He has a shooting stroke that should be able to go down at the next level. He's a passable defender, just somebody who could definitely get minutes on a bigger stage. And speaking of big stages, Cam Spencer only seemed to improve his game the further the Huskies went into the playoffs, and somebody who probably wasn't on anybody's draft boards really until the postseason run for them. But I just look at the patience that he plays with in the offensive game, and obviously, the catch and shoot shooting from three is already a massive pro for him, but there is also some level of creation that, no, he doesn't necessarily have the most athletic build, the tightest handle, or anything to ever be a consistent isolation shooter, but in terms of being the guy who gets kicked out to off of a drive and kick, I think he can very, very successfully, attack closeouts or just be able to knock down the big shots in the moment. So I think that Cam Spencer, I'm really interested in him because he was a ton of fun to watch in college, and, almost selfishly, I hope that he does have a role for himself in the NBA. And then another little personal favorite for me is Jalen Bridges of Baylor. He was a junior, I believe, this past year, and I watched a lot of Baylor games this year because I was interested in Yves Missi, as I just mentioned, and Jacoby Walter, the freshman who could very well be a lottery pick this year. But Jalen Bridges just continued to stick out to me as a very high-level glue guy and somebody who does all of the right things. He hits the shots off the catch. He is able to hold his own in one-on-one basketball, and he has the size as well. I just think that he is going to, coming from a situation in Baylor where, again, I just loved watching the team. I thought they were one of the hardest working teams in college basketball last year. I just think that I could see a role for him being able to apply some of that intensity that they played with on a regular basis under Scott Drew at Baylor and put it towards a winning effort in the NBA. But let me know if there are any other sort of sleeper prospects that you guys are interested in that we can see as it plays out. The NBA draft is tonight, at least the first round, so will be really interesting to see all of that. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Be sure to check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. I know we started a little bit later today, but we are live 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern every single weekday. So we will be back tomorrow with some reactions to the draft. So definitely be sure to tune in then. As for now, I am TJ Mabardi, and we will see you tomorrow. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.